Madame Ladyfingers. A story of revenge, but not from a lady herself. It wasn't as if everyone judged Madame Ladyfingers. Not everyone stared right through her as if she was a blank canvas on the wall, ignoring her presence as if she wasn't really there. Plenty of souls fell in love with her melt in the middle gooey chocolate brown fudge eyes, her kai-wide double chin, the way her dimples reiterated after the exchange of simple pleasantries. Madame Ladyfingers tended to wear long flowing dresses. She liked to wear sandals too. If you studied her for long enough, it was as if her spread apart feet were drawing up energies from the ground below, purifying the energies around her. Madame Ladyfingers didn't have many friends. It seemed it was Frances's destiny to mingle with unfriendly folk. For some reason, she always gravitated towards the meaner types. Usually small cliques of petty-minded individuals were her forte. She didn't know what she had done to deserve being treated so poorly. It simply was the way it had always been. Frances first became Madame Ladyfingers on a Saturday morning. She prepared a trifle at the community hall kitchen at the local village cricket match fete, being a relative newcomer, having only joined a couple of months earlier. During the first session, everyone had been lovely to her, wanting to get to know her better, asking lots of questions and helping her to settle in and feel welcome. Although in hindsight, it may well have just been a ploy, testing to see whether she fitted in or not. By the second meeting, their demeanour had already grown colder. The ignoring and funny looks quickly came after that. A few sessions in, she was hardly acknowledged at all. And if she was, it was through great tolerance, sly put-downs, catty glances, and inside jokes she had never been made aware of, or worse, walking into a room full of hush laughter. Frances refused to let other people's unfriendliness push her out of the baking group. She loved to bake, plus she was brilliant at it. Her goal was to cram in as many fun activities as she could muster, until she couldn't fit in any more. After all, having an active schedule was what kept her happy, and no amount of rude behaviour was ever going to stop her from living her best life, especially now that she had finally retired from her role as a secretary for the local council. That Saturday, the Baking Society was catering for a charity tea party in support of a fundraising cricket event. Everybody was given a choice of what they wanted to prepare. Frances had opted to bake the Florentines. She willingly ticked the Florentine option, delighted that she would finally be able to show off her culinary skills. Florentines had always been her speciality. It helped that she was half Florentine herself. Her mother had taught her how to bake them from an early age. They even came out better than any Michelin star chef signature type biscuits. Frances prepared the ingredients for the Florentines on the counter. She was interrupted by Victoria, a tall, thin lady with an authoritative demeanour, icy blue eyes, and a long nose. She swooped by next to her. "There has been a change of plan. I am to do the Florentines now. You are to prepare a trifle." "But it says on the list I am to do the Florentines." Frances pointed out the baking timetable on the fridge. "Look, it says here, Victoria. You are down for the sponge cake. I am to bake the Florentines." "There has been a change of plan. Florentines are very complex. So Vivian said she'd prefer it if I did them. I prepared a sponge cake earlier, so I have time. You can do the trifle. Everybody loves a trifle. Plus, it will be a lot easier for you." "Excuse me, I can make Florentines in my sleep. I have baked zillions of them in my lifetime," retorted Frances. Her late Florentine mother would be banging on her coffin if she knew her only daughter had been rejected from baking Florentines from an English baking society. Frances certainly knew how to bake Florentines. She knew a secret recipe, one that had been passed down for generations. They would be the best any of them had ever tasted. "It's not personal, darling," Vivian the leader called out by her worktop, while kneading dough. "It's simply the way things have panned out, so now I suggest you and Victoria swap places so Victoria can crack on with the Florentines. The ingredients for the trifle are already set out for you. Quickly, quickly, as fast as you can. Nobody likes an underset jelly, and we don't have much time." "But I know how to make Florentines." Vivian threw her hands up in the air. "No time for this. We only have until this afternoon." "Frances, Will you please collaborate? A slight expression of triumph emerged on Victoria's face as Frances was signposted to the opposite side of the kitchen, a confined space next to a slightly jarred window by a sink with a consistently dripping tap. Frances picked up a pair of scissors, cutting the top corner of the packet of sponge ladyfingers. Carefully she laid out the thick spongy fingers at the base of the trifle dish. Despite being slightly miffed about her altercation with Victoria, she would put all her energy into creating an excellent trifle, the best she could manage with the ingredients placed in front of her. Frances would get to make the Florentines next time. She would make sure of it. It wasn't such a big deal. As Frances was laying the ladyfingers at the base of the trifle dish, she came distracted by a loud whisper that was never intended to be a whisper. Her porky fingers would soak up the sherry better than any of those ladyfingers would. Frances wasn't entirely sure, but she felt confident that the sound originated from Victoria and her friend Bernice's direction. A wave of laughter echoed through the kitchen. "That's a terrible thing to say," chuckled a waspy-voiced gent, who reminded Frances of the busybody pensioner Horace from her favourite soap on the TV. The echo of laughter lingered longer than she hoped. She knew they were laughing at her expense. Frances awkwardly rummaged through the cupboard noisily in search of a measuring jug to mix the jelly ingredients. Frances was the type of person who rarely asserted herself, preferring a quiet life. She'd always tried to avoid conflict if she could help it. Maybe if she had stood up for herself more, situations such as this would never have arisen in the first place. On the other hand, maybe she was being the cruel one, more so than even she cared to admit. Whenever people were rude to her, something bad always seemed to happen to them. There they were thinking they could get away with their behaviour. She was a target, maybe because she was quiet or a little socially awkward, yet they seldom did. Weren't there some type of predators in the wild that like to confuse their prey? Alligators and some types of spiders? Maybe she was just like them. She hoped she wasn't. She didn't mean to trick people. It just seemed to be the way events always panned out. No. How could it all be her fault? If her peers had been more self-aware in the first place, brave enough to embrace their own shadows, emotionally intelligent enough to peer into her big brown soulful eyes, they would never had to suffer in the first place. One simple act of tenacity could have improved their destiny. Inside her eyes a gateway to the mirror of their own soul, steering them away from further life paths of stagnancy, bad decisions, and consequences best avoided. Yet they would have to die an ego death, repent, face their wrongdoings. That was painful, but they could have chosen again if they had really wanted, sparing themselves and her from this uninspiring, repetitive little cycle. Because all Frances really wanted to do was focus on creating an eye-catching trifle. She would not let that rude behaviour determine the rest of her day. It usually didn't. By the afternoon, just in time for the cricket match, the baking group's marquee was fully prepared to serve an array of food and beverages. A lavish white linen tablecloth, adorned with embroidered blue flowers, spread across several tables, each presenting tiered trays of nicely cut sandwiches, thick cuts of meat, freshly sliced cakes, scones, and biscuits, including the Florentines. At the end of the table stood a lonely but excellently created trifle, decorated with fruit, jelly, sponge, custard, and cream. On the top layer a generous sprinkle of hundreds and thousands. A ladle sat by the trifle, with a note that said, "Please help yourselves." It didn't take long for Victoria, Bernice, and Horace to notice that Madame Ladyfingers was not at the station as she should be. After all, it was part of her duty to serve the busy crowd the trifle she had prepared. "Where is she?" Vivian inquired. "She can't be too far away. She needs to be at the serving station." Eventually the threesome found her sitting outside the marquee, in a corner at a tucked-away table, engrossed in the cricket match, nibbling on a plate of crustless cucumber sandwiches. Why are you not serving like everyone else? Asked Horace, the doppelganger from her favourite soap opera. Frances nodded towards her hands. My hands and fingers, they've come over all shaky and strange. I was thinking I should rest them a moment. I didn't want to be spilling all that trifle all over the customers, or ruining that beautiful tablecloth, said Madame Ladyfingers. Maybe you should see a doctor, Vivian suggested, slightly concerned about Frances, partly anxious about how it could affect the charity event. If any of the bakers were to take ill during the charity cricket function, an ambulance would be parked outside the tent, blocking the entire area. That could be enough to spoil the entire function. Don't worry, I will be fine. I think I just need to sit it out, maybe rest a while, replied Frances. A short while later, towards the end of the cricket match, Madame Ladyfingers had still not returned. Well, Madame Ladyfingers is certainly not struggling picking up her plate of food, Bernice scoffed to his cronies. Victoria smiled politely as she poured tea to a customer, all the while seething internally at the audacity of Ladyfingers, who was feigning illness despite there being evidently nothing wrong with her, while they were all busy serving. Madame Ladyfingers looked glowing. She looked better than she had ever looked. In contrast, Victoria herself had genuinely felt unwell since lunch, since she had taken the Florentines out of the oven. Had it been something she had eaten? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that she did not feel like herself. Victoria had struggled through the entire function, too professional to slow down. She hoped she was not coming down with the virus. By the time the cricket match had finished, Madame Ladyfingers was still seated. She did not look in pain. On the contrary, she sat merrily chatting to customers, eating her sandwiches and sipping her tea. However, she did get up at one point to grab herself a huge slice of red velvet cake, which Horace had baked, a terrible gossip, but a terrific baker. She sat fork in hand, relaxed and content. Meanwhile, the food station was relentlessly busy with the serving of food and beverage, everybody all queuing up at once. If anyone deserves to sit down, it's you, Bernice said to Victoria. You have felt unwell all afternoon, and no disrespect, but you look awful, yet you haven't complained once. A double frown line appeared on Victoria's forehead as she witnessed Frances. The sunlight reflected the red undertones of her usually dark, voluptuous hair. Frances looked more vibrant than she ever had. Vivian, however, was feeling worse. Her whole body ached. She was desperate for her bed. Even holding the teapot had become a challenge. Not to mention she'd spilt hot tea all over Mr. Thackeray, the vicar's brother. How embarrassing was that? How could Madame Ladyfingers just sit there relaxing, while they were all working so hard to make the function run smoothly? Horace had re-nicknamed Madame Lady Not Lift a Finger. She was a newcomer. She should not be behaving like that, and proving her worth instead. Madame Ladyfingers gracefully lifted her teacup with delicately elegant fingers. That was when Victoria noticed. Gone were the swollen and clunky hands of the morning bacon session. Victoria shot a look down at her own hands. She was met with horror. Hands that she had always secretly been so proud of had transformed into large, swollen, puffy, bloated, fat sausage-like fingers. They had never looked like this before. Now they mirrored the state of Ladyfingers' hands from that very morning, when Victoria had first named Frances Madame Ladyfingers. It was as if they had swapped hands.